Welcome back, friends. You're just in time for the Johnny Brew Show.
What's going on, everybody? My name is John Brookhagen, host of the Johnny Brew Show, and welcome back to another really exciting episode. It's actually an episode I've been looking forward to doing for a couple of months now. You guys have been following along, and every week there's a new meeting, there's a new judge ruling, there's a new vacating of previous ruling, and so on and so forth. And the grassroots folk hero has been Jesse Law, and I get him to laugh, and I'm glad you finally made your way over to the Johnny Brew Show. Welcome, folk hero, Jesse Law.
Gosh, that's a new one for me, but I'll take it.
I just came up with it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to it too. I maybe didn't let on as much. You know, I've not wanted to engage a lot of complicated issues that, frankly, you know, speaking over makes lawyers' jobs harder. You know?
Right. And throughout this episode, I'm going to be asking all types of questions. Anything that's currently pending or anything, you know, just let us know. Obviously, we want as much information as possible, but the last thing we want to do is handicap anyone in any shape or form. We just want to learn more.
Sure.
First of all, I have to say, you know, I posted a little bit earlier today about my feelings on September 11th, and this is going to be airing on September 11th, and you know, I even said earlier, you know, I've been posting and talking about September 11th, and there's nothing that words or photographs or memes or even testimonies can do to encapsulate how I feel on this day. And, you know, I just, if you wanted to add anything to that, only because this is our September 11th, and I can't believe it's been 20 years. How old are you, Jesse?
39.
39.
I'm going to hold on to that 3 in the front just a little while longer.
How many years have you been 39?
Wow, we're still only on less than a year.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it did shape my life in a different way. But as I reflect on that day and where I was, right? I went to go mow a lawn.
Me
like,
too.
I was like keeping grounds for an apartment. And I didn't learn until, you know, much later.
You had worked all day. And
yeah. And what was interesting as I think about that, I think it reminds me of how much of a kid I was. And then I wondered if I ever grew up since. But I was not prepared. It was so big that it numbed me.
Right.
And I can't imagine because, I mean, I grew up in the Midwest and I was in Utah at the time, so I wasn't a New York guy.
Right.
First time I'd been to New York City was, you know, years after that.
Right.
So I can't imagine what it would be like in terms of rocking you in a foundational way much differently than me. But for me, the way that shaped me was our political landscape in a reaction to it. You know, Big Brother.
Yeah, the Patriot Act.
You know, and I went in that libertarian direction to try to preserve individual freedom. That shaped me. That's who I still am. But you know, as I think of that and how massive those buildings, I took my children there.
To the memorial site.
Yeah, in 2018, and I have a picture. They're all solemn. They're like, we don't smile at a place like this, Dad. You know,
Right.
They're very emotionally intelligent people.
Right.
And I just remember, you know, like it was a real thing spiritually to connect with, and the children were there too, and it was just a powerful moment. And anyway, those are my comments.
I mean, it's funny. There's some parallels from what you were saying. First of all, you know, I'm wearing this in remembrance of September 11th, and I remember the Boston bombing during the Boston Marathon. And I hate Boston. You know, I mean, that just comes with the territory of being a New Yorker. And, you know, Boston people hate New York. And I'm guessing, being from Midwest, there's always been some I don't know. I just feel like people look at New York kind of like as the evil empire or something like that, whether you're talking about sports or you're talking about, you know, a New York Minute or how New Yorkers think they're the greatest Or
well,
no,
I mean,
they're-
you all think that. I can tell you that I got over any rivalry because we were a Pittsburgh Pirates fan, given that my grandfather pitched and won against the 1960s Yankees in that World Series. I wouldn't have a problem.
Really?
We already overcame the obstacle of
Right.
the Yankees, so we were fine.
If you say so. But my point was, even with Boston, I hate Boston. I hate every person in Boston, everything Boston represents. And when they got the marathon bombing, I mean, I love Boston. And I hated the terrorists for making me love Boston.
Oh my
You know what I
gosh.
mean? I just had this new connection with Boston that I felt for them, you know? And I feel like maybe somebody from the Midwest or somebody from Boston even, you know, gave us that same feeling of brotherhood, even though they might have had a animosity towards the idea of New York beforehand.
Yeah.
And also, you know, it's funny you said you were mowing lawns. I owned a landscaping business. And in order to deal with it, I had woken up, I had an easy day that day, so I had, you know, was watching the news and everything, and after so much of the news that I was watching, I needed to leave the couch, I needed to leave the house, I needed to get out and do something, so I listened to Howard Stern for the rest of the day while I did my job by myself at an FDNY firefighter's house. And I transplanted some bushes. So it's funny that you were mowing lawns. I was transplanting bushes on 9/11/2001 as well. And I was 24 or 25. You were 19 or 20. So it's relative. But anyway, you know, this isn't about September 11th. But since we are publishing on this day, I definitely believe we should bring it up. Moving on.
Yes, sir.
So, where'd you grow up?
Well, I mean, it wasn't like it was a military household. My dad was excelling in education administration, so believe it or not, I did time here in Vegas. Went to a place called Doris French Elementary. No one
Really?
really knows where it is, but I do.
Right.
But yeah, it was a bunch of states before Vegas, and then I grew up in Quincy, Illinois, along the Mississippi River. So I had woods in the backyard, 5 acres.
Nice.
That's
How
that's where I grew up.
far from Chicago, I'm guessing, is the nearest city? Or
Well, St. Louis is closer,
St.
but
Louis.
see, having a sports family, I had an uncle that played for the Cubs, so there's no chance I can claim St. Louis. I mean, it was that way. And there was a nice rivalry in town. But we were a little closer to St. Louis and not close enough to Chicago. We claim Chicago, more arts, you know.
Right. The second city.
That's right, yeah. Which is fine with me because that makes you funnier.
If you think so. Worst pizza, though, of course. And then, so...
That I agree
You
with.
went to college?
Yeah.
Where'd you go to
Well,
college?
I went to college late. I mean, I didn't...
Well, me too. I went to college for a year. I got kicked out.
Yeah.
Or I quit.
So here's what's funny. I mean, my dad being in education administration, he was the head of a community college. That was the route he took, and it was a number of them. And as a president of a college, he's telling his kids, most he could tell you is do the right things, go to school, go to church. It was the most in-depth conversation at the time. And none of the kids really took that education as a priority, right? So I have all of these business owners and executives as siblings, and they're all amazing, but they never really prioritized it. And I'm one of those that didn't prioritize it. I did do you're here, you're there, whatever. And then at some point, I end up, when I'm here, I moved here to Vegas in 2005.
Me too.
And doing mortgages, came from Dallas. Okay, I've lived a few places. I did end up going to UNLV, and that was for classical singing.
Oh, over at the music department. Nice. And, you know, we're going to get into your singing as well, but that was what you studied in school.
Yeah.
And then you end up moving into politics. So
Yeah.
tell me about a little bit about your resume and how you evolved into, you know.
Sure. Well, I mean, you know, I did it all backwards. So don't be surprised when there's a unique perspective. I mean, I've always done it backwards. You know, you get married young, you have kids before your career.
Right.
You do your college and your things like that, and that's tough. I get into the finance with mortgages because I can string words together, but that doesn't mean I'm a salesman. You know, you have to learn.
Well, yeah, but intelligence and public speaking are two things that don't always go well together. So
Right.
if you have that, you know, you have a gift and you could use it to sell, that's for sure.
Yeah, like it was funny. I did door-to-door vacuum sales when I was like
That
18.
that is salesman.
That is sales. So here was the problem though. I didn't want to like saddle somebody with a $2,000 burden. Like I thought that was a weird thing to do. And so my boss was like, you have like a tremendous pitch and no ability to close. And I was also like clueless as a human.
Right.
But anyway, so I do move here to work with family in the mortgage business, and it's like a second generation thing, working mortgages. And that was just, at the time, I called it my brother's dream. It was for his shop.
Right.
I didn't know what I was doing. I just had a family. It was kind of like that line from Fight Club.
Right.
Hey, Dad, now what?
Right.
You know?
Now you get a job. Now you put on a suit
now
and you go to work
Yeah.
at your brother's mortgage company.
That's right.
Right.
And, you know, I at that time as a kid, I became inspired over a reaction to police state issues. You know, I'd listened to like Alex Jones in 2005.
Right, and you already mentioned the Patriot Act twice, so I could see that that's something.
It was a big motivator, and it had touched my family in a number of ways, more than one. The police and justice issue, to the point where that absolutely solidified the kind of person I wanted to be when there's injustice, for sure.
Right.
And I get motivated on Ron Paul because I saw a system that was not only broken but rather corrupt. Ron Paul is not a corrupt guy.
Right.
But he also stands for all these great things. And so I just get off the couch, don't know what I'm doing. I even run in a Republican primary for Congress. Oh, my gosh.
Totally green. Just like, I'll run.
Against one of my very best friends in the primary. We weren't best friends at the time. And I mean, I did get more votes than him. But it was certainly coming in second and third place against an incumbent. But I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I wanted to do something. I had the arrogance to think that I knew better. And then I found out how little I knew and continue to this day. But one of my favorite lessons that I recall rather often was when it was 2010, and I'm doing this party stuff now for 3 years. No idea what I'm doing, but I look to my neighbor sitting near me and around and start realizing that they have had these enriching lives themselves. They have families and careers, and these slight disagreements over the police state, while very urgent or whatever it was, doesn't amount to the fact that they are human, and actually I could see them now as great people. And in doing and making that decision, I was still associated with the Ron Paul thing. And so there even remains rivalry 10 years later over the Ron Paul thing.
I hear it from like our friend Chris Dyer at the PAA podcast.
Yeah.
He's not happy still.
People tell me, and they try to act like that doesn't associate with me. But the point was, yes, all of those grassroots coming in resemble all grassroots. They are definitely kicking open the door. There's a sense of urgency there, and that's what I was falling for until I wasn't, when I realized that we had a lot in common. That doesn't mean that I accept, elected officials or other people who allow bad behavior.
Right.
I'm not going to. But, that's sort of how I jumped into politics and where I went. I mean, I could keep going on that resume, I guess.
But and you bring up an interesting point when you're talking about the libertarian angle, or you're talking about the police state angle. And then you talk about 10 years later, now in 2020, and you talk about groups like Black Lives Matter or, anti-police stuff. And I don't understand why we can't encourage them to be conservatives, because it's not that we want to be anti-police, just the more laws we have, the less justice we have. If you have too many laws on the books, then the police will get to pick who or which crimes that they prosecute. But if we have less laws, then the police could say, oh, murderer, oh, you robbed someone, let's arrest you. And then it's no longer about the race or the sex or the, some sort of identity. It's just, all right, you broke a obvious law, you get in trouble. But here, whether you're talking about vaccine mandates or you're talking about jaywalking or seatbelts even, I'm all for seatbelts, but why do we need another law where now a black person could say, well, if I was a white person not wearing a seatbelt, you wouldn't have pulled me over. But now I'm a black person wearing a seatbelt. Meanwhile, if we didn't have a seatbelt law, we wouldn't have to talk about that. Either you killed somebody or you didn't. Less laws, more justice. That's what I thought of when you were telling that story.
Yeah, that's how I see it. Proudest moment in the administration at least top 5, right? I was doing my thing on my issue, and all of a sudden it's Rand and the president on criminal justice reform. The moments of full circle of that was an issue, okay, I can assure you. That was an issue when I got started I didn't think others would understand, ever. And therefore, maybe the whole point of, I say a lot, I didn't know what I was doing. What I wanted to do was figure out what the hell to do.
Right.
And when I would be working with any legislator or candidate, talking about criminal justice reform would have also been very foreign. So I didn't feel like that was something that I would see changed. And all of a sudden, the two most important men to me in leadership take on this criminal justice issue. And it meant the world to me.
Right.
So.
And I'm guessing you're referring to Trump and
Rand,
the non-violent offenders getting out of jail and stuff. Because, I've had liberals say to me, oh my God, what? I want to empty the jails.
Yeah.
Not of violent offenders.
Yeah.
But I want to empty the jail. If even, say, you get a drug charge or something like that, fine people, $2,000, you got to make people pay. But we don't need to fill up the jails with somebody who, a housewife that's smoking too much pot or is selling it to her best friend,
Yeah, I would, and this, we're not going to do the issue debate thing, but when I hear you say, fine, I'm sure. My challenge is I see a system that I would call a criminal justice system where they loop in those who are in weak places in life, who are already scared, already powerless, and now they've got a court date, and now they've got a parole officer, and they're already trying, and I just see it as predatory as hell.
And that's where I could see, say, a Black Lives Matter group, which I disagree with 99% of their things, but that's when I could see where somebody of the middle class can get a lawyer and figure it out, and somebody from a lower class wouldn't be able to get a lawyer to figure it out. You get a ball-busting parole officer, or he might be nefarious, and again, the more bureaucracy, the more laws, I feel like the less justice.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't want it to be in terms of being like the single issue guy on this issue, but we're just diving deep into that's how I think about that issue. And I want also, I think it sets up our those who are great in our system, good people, for failure, right? Because our police officers are trying to do what they need to do. And then they, unfortunately, get the front row view of the hypocrisy in the law and the way you treat things,
right,
where there's not really parity across the board. Certainly for those who are here undocumented, they already know that, well, it's not worth the paperwork.
Because they won't go through with it, because that would alert the feds, and then if the feds are alerted, they deport them.
And then it's a political thing, and I don't need attention from my boss and whatever.
Right.
And it just sets up folks for failure. And so I refuse to be one of those people that has these criticism and then suddenly denies the honor of those who try to help the community. Like, I'm not that guy.
Or even a cop who sees somebody stealing from Walgreens, right? Yeah. Is he going to get into a fist fight and risk injury to arrest somebody that he knows? Well, it's $800. We're not prosecuting under $950. So they stop enforcing the law, and then and just getting back to the police issue on 9/11, I think about this a lot. Is that when I hear the anti-police rhetoric, it bothers me so much, because every time I see a cop or firefighter, my singular thought is they're sitting there, many times doing nothing, waiting for something horrible to happen so they could help us.
Yeah.
And even if they're doing nothing, if something happens, we will be running one way while they're running the other way. Yeah. And how could you not pay them the respect? Because that's it. That's the body. If a tower's coming down, they're going to help you get away, and they're not going to leave themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's that was one thing about visiting New York regularly when I was working in the administration was seeing all the police lined up whenever we were leaving whatever event at night, and they're all kind of there in that camaraderie, and it made me I recognized in myself, okay, I'm grateful I have like a group here who responds the way that you just described.
Yeah, and that's why I find it such a shame that like I said, like an organization like BLM wouldn't try to join conservatives. Let's just have less laws.
Well, I mean,
and
think
respect
about
the police.
Well, and my reaction to you bringing it up, like, why not? I am a huge believer in what it means to have appropriate leadership. So if I'm going to compare what happened in, say, any other activist time, like from the right or whatever, you have Tea Party and Ron Paul and different movements. Those leaders were sort of instilling these other values, and the BLM movement not actually, focusing on some of those values. Then those who are there because they're naturally angry, they don't have any appropriate direction for what they're angry about.
Unless you look deeper and realize it's a communist organization with a political goal, not, in a catchy name. Anyway, and I know we can go off on tangents, but moving on, you've been working in Nevada, you've been doing the Republican Party thing for almost 8-10 years. How do you start getting involved on the national level? How do you find yourself at the White House working with maybe the greatest president we ever had? Tell us that story. How does that evolve?
It's I call DC Never Land. I probably won't ever. I'm sorry, my DC experience, right? That working for 45. We set up ourselves at the state party to ensure that we wouldn't ever stack the deck against against candidates, and we'd run it right.
And not to interrupt, so you're working with Michael McDonald, and is that since 2013 or even before that?
2011.
All right.
He got first elected in 12.
All right.
And look, we went in there in a rather weak position because the Romney folks were took it rather personal that there were any Ron Paul folks associated with the state party, and it wasn't really about me. They'd say, it's not about you, Jess, it's these others.
And Michael McDonald was originally also a Rand Paul guy? No.
Michael's an interesting guy because he was a local government guy, so he doesn't see the world like a philosophically leaning political person.
Right, because people look at him as a national, the state chair working with the RNC, so they probably see him more as a top-down person.
Yeah, well...
But you're saying he's more a bottom-up.
He is. The truth is there were a series of folks that were there for him, and about 10% of the voting membership were Ron Paul folks, but they were there for him, and he just wouldn't forget that. And so when the choice was made from the Romney folks at the time, Michael wasn't going to throw anyone under the bus. He didn't.
And you were one of those Rand Paul guys.
Yeah. So, but we were in a very weak position. I mean, I know exactly what it means to have a state party be punished for, being the new guy, going against the grain in theory. And their motives weren't... what they said about us wasn't true. It actually matched their motives, which was a different kind of control.
Projection.
So it was just a complicated situation, but we got painted a certain way. And I bring that up because it took us cycle after cycle of changing culture with our elected officials. So 14 comes in, we build a great group of conservatives that certainly were the majority in the assembly, and then some in the Senate. But when 15, 16 were coming around, the heir apparent for my support would be Rand, right? And I found, there was something there that I didn't want to support Rand within, and but I was open-minded, of course, and so I would have listened to his announcement. But for some reason, being drawn to Donald Trump's announcement, he was the only one that I really watched, and I was at first entertained with the escalator thing, because let's face it, that was awkward TV, right? And then he started speaking, and I saw through the show, so to speak, enough to say, oh my gosh, these are actually all my issues, but the difference is it's a very direct push into the...
Very blunt.
And so I knew I supported that, and I was excited about that. And it took me probably a week and a half to go, and therefore. And in that therefore moment, I started working with our state chairman. He goes to the RNC in Cleveland and becomes the first state chairman to support Trump. Meanwhile, I'm on the phone with him saying this is why he's going to win and all that. And I
so you were on board with Mr. McDonald doing that?
Yeah, it was like a 1-2 punch. I mean, Michael and I.
Right.
And I worked with Michael Glassner, who was the chair of the campaign at the time, and is currently the chair of the campaign again, but he was the finance chair for the 20 election. They didn't hire me. They hired an AFP guy, Americans for Prosperity, because Lewandowski was comfortable with that.
Right.
It was whatever. I was a student, you know.
Right. I mean, because have you been working with the RNC yourself, or was it GOP, NVGOP was kind of your ceiling up to this point?
NVGOP would have been my ceiling. Now, but I did stuff for the senatorial caucus one year up in Montana, and
so you did a little bit of interstate work.
Yeah, absolutely. But it was certainly like a Nevada focus. And what I never did was I never joined the culture club of the RNC consultants or that path. I just never did it. And so for that reason, I actually credit that as I'm not in their club, which means I don't have to follow their rules, which means now my eyes can open to what the opportunity is. Frankly, had I gone a conventional route, I wouldn't have seen Trump for what he is. Why? Because what Trump really represented was proving them wrong. So if I was part of them, I would have felt like he was proving me wrong. That's just how I see it.
And you're starting to see that now maybe a little bit into some of the never Trumpers that, you know, like they say, you know, some people would still rather fight even though they've already been proven wrong.
Yeah.
You know, and it's baffling that, you know, people aren't willing to have a different point of view as they learn more information.
What was interesting in 15, to go back to kind of that relationship, POTUS wanted Michael elected in 2015. That was my gig. I counted the votes. It's what I do. You know, we were successful. And I was the liaison to the Trump campaign for the state party. And when the caucuses and POTUS came to town for those, I sat across from their general counsel, Don McGahn, over dinner. So we're just eating. And he keeps getting calls. Well, what about this problem at this high school? Well, this is my turf, and I know exactly how to resolve it, or whether or not they should have it be like, yeah, you should suspect there's a problem. Well, we had worked very hard to ensure it was going to be a level playing field. But Don, I essentially was his fixer for that, to understand what was happening. And it was
and
like
a couple
seamless.
of weird things happened that just fell into place where you got to showcase your skills.
Yeah, it was just, and I'd known him loosely because he had previously worked for the Nevada GOP, but it was a moment to get to know him, and he's friendly, and we're friends. And we have music in common. He's a very great metal guitar player.
Really?
He used to do stuff in Baltimore.
That's a little bit more my style than your opera.
Hey, please, we haven't discussed the music yet.
No, we're going to. Don't worry. Stay tuned. Coming up in hour number 4 of the Jesse Law interview.
You know, and I did the work to make sure that everything was clear on the Trump campaign. Through that, I then went to RNC in Florida, in Hollywood, Florida. Boy, that was interesting to me. Who's that guy that had the terrible circumstance of going to jail, that was a campaign manager for a little bit? Sitting across from him and watching him play with his ring was like surreal. And we get ourselves to the national convention. I was part of the team who helped stop the the rule changes and all that would have maybe resulted in a contested election. And so I'm building this relationship with them by just helping them do. It's just what I normally do. And I wasn't like, therefore, help me.
Right.
You know, because I had stuff back in Nevada.
And you want to try and impress anybody, it's just...
Yeah, it was just part of the deal. And then when they needed to take on Election Day operations, which translates to looking for voter fraud opportunities and stopping them, they gave me 2 weeks' notice before early voting here in Nevada to get a program up. We did it very well. The training curriculum was something that I put together, and then I conducted all the trainings, and we staffed everywhere. It was very efficient. But
then are you working? Was Alita Benson part of this, or no? This is way all right.
So we were sued by HRC on some trumped up terrible accusation of a violation of minority voting rights, suppression of minority voting rights, called the KKK Act of 1865. True story. And I'm sitting in front of a judge who was a civil rights activist. His mother marched, and he was an appointee from Obama. Technically, you sit there and you wonder how successful can you be. But the accusation was that I was asking our volunteers, which were mostly senior citizens, to suppress voters. And that was ridiculous. So we prevailed.
Right.
We prevailed very well. As a result of that work plus the election work, Don McGahn recruited me to work for his general counsel office during the presidential transition team. Again, I'm just doing my job.
Shut up.
So now,
you got to be like a little kid, though.
It was literally another. This is my second Fight Club reference. You know how they sit out in front of. we're sitting out in front of the GSA building at a Pete's Coffee, and I'm just sort of sitting there, and then sure enough, one of my friends comes over and says, "What are you doing here?" And he sits next to me, and we're like waiting because we have to be credentialed to get in. It's very high security. Okay?
I could only imagine.
And I still have that badge somewhere. I'm not supposed to.
Cut that.
Yeah. No, it's just a piece of plastic at this
Right,
point.
right. I understand.
But we didn't really have direct instructions on how to interface. But what was serving Mr. McGann was to help his reputation around the building. So in addition to the work that they had us do, it was to like kind of build networks. And I did vetting for Mike Pompeo and for Linda McMahon, and then I Rick Perry. I could keep going, but then they put me on murder boards where I would do these pretend to be the evil Democrat senator. I was the only one.
That would be great.
I mean, I was like using theatrical training. I was mean
Right.
to Linda McMahon.
Well, you
mean.
gotta be to do your job right.
Oh no, you're clearly not DC. Here's the truth.
Right.
You have to be so demure that she'll want to hire you. So here I am,
Right.
and this
And you're
is
trying to do your job the best you can.
this is a typical Jesse story where it's like, of course that happened, Jess. So and by the way, I have all the mortgage training. This is SBA, and so I'm kind of like knowing what to look for in the vetting process. So I have a really great set of questions, and then also I wanted to pick on her for being a billionaire, and I was pretending to be Senator Cory Booker.
Oh, so then how could you not be an asshole?
Absolutely. So I'm like, you don't even know what the price of milk is, and
Right, you're
what
so
about-"
disconnected.
And of course, it's not true about her.
Right.
And I actually got her
Right,
to
the
make a
McMahons
face
are-
and grimace and all this kind of stuff. It was very effective for what they wanted to tell her. And then she gets to the hearing, and it turns out that indeed Cory Booker is a personal friend of the family. That she sailed through with no hard questions. Why? Because Senator Blumenthal, her former opponent out of Connecticut, like greased the process.
Right, so she was able to slide through.
I was mean to this wonderful person.
For no reason.
And I was like, afterward, I'm actually nice, and I'm a big fan. And then later in the administration, and she did our agency a favor. She comes to our event to help open it. And she arrives, and she's got her entourage, and she's kind of limping. She just had foot surgery, and I remember you. Yeah. So Linda McMahon remembered me then.
Well, that's something.
Yeah.
I don't,
But so from there, look, I did that part. I just was
everything
doing my
they-
job.
right. Everything
And
they gave you,
I
took
was-
your orders and marched
Exactly.
up the hill and did
I
the
was
best you
sleeping on
could.
floors. I was sharing, literally floors in Arlington, DC, wherever I could stay. It was just a volunteer thing. Very Fight Club. And sure enough, they approached me about the Export-Import Bank. I knew right then my boss wanted it. I knew that what they were telling me when they were recruiting me wasn't accurate, that my boss would want it. And I then spent the next 2 years knowing that everyone between me and the boss would want this agency to close. So I did rather unique circumstances to resolve that agency. It resulted in the National Security Council, with whom I had this partnership with, and brilliant stuff. Oh my gosh.
Right. And heavy.
Making part of a pillar of Buy America, Export-Import Bank in the United States. So it was because the political issue had already been drawn for 10 years with bodies on both sides. And if I wanted to go about just arguing that issue, where's my imagination, first of all? But it would have been fruitless. So I changed the conversation, and I made it, of course, national security, which is hard to argue with already, but it was legit. It was focused on China. And I went, like I always say this, I went like the Music Man, like selling a song to each agency and department. And so I'm speaking to Wilbur Ross and Mnuchin and all this, and saying, XM can do this for you. I felt like I was a vendor for like printing.
But you
or
see, you
something.
needed your practice selling. That's why you were going door to door with vacuums,
that's
and now
right.
you're talking to Mitch McConnell or whoever, Linda McMahon.
Never Mitch McConnell.
But just, these really important people selling.
Yeah, and it worked, and they were really interested because, for instance, in the Department of Transportation, if they're ever going to loan money, they also have to have Congress approve the loan, which is why that doesn't happen. That's why that doesn't happen.
Right.
And so I'm saying, well, no one approves our money, and they're all like. So all of a sudden, the real dilemma ended up being that I'm pushing this issue forward and doing a fantastic job outnumbering my opposition, right? I'm all of a sudden uniting the clans on this. And, the Koch brother
So you got
influence.
experience uniting factions of the Republican Party?
100%. And then I had the folks that were philosophically opposed to this, the Koch brother influence types, who, by the way, are fantastic, hated this issue. And they went to block us on a congressional move because of my work. The National Security Council saw it for what it was. They asked me my advice. I said, you need to go principal to principal right now and explain from a principal level what has just happened. And when that happened, our policy was approved. And I had gotten it across the finish line.
You're getting
And it was
everything.
awesome. So, yeah.
Another mission accomplished.
Yeah. That was for me. It was like setting a goal, being the new guy in town, and then accomplishing it. And I mean, like, world changing stuff. Very proud, very proud.
That's amazing. And so, how many years did you spend in Washington? All 4 years?
No,
Or
2.
2?
Yeah.
And then what did you do?
Well, I was sent to Denver to work as the regional director for the SBA's Office of Advocacy, which was like mountainous and business and tech. And
And this is still pre-COVID.
Yeah. So it was another appointee job, and it was kind of like, sending someone out to pasture because you're not in the rough and tumble of,
Right.
of the political work. You're now actually doing something.
But it also
It's more
sounds
relaxing.
like you're, this is deep state stuff now. This is, Washington type bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Any observations about that kind of stuff? I mean, for example, I've worked in casinos. Just like you, I've had a lot of weird jobs before I settled on what may have been my calling.
That's
teaching.
a whole other episode where we could have a good time.
And yes, hour 5 of the Johnny Brew Show. But what was my point? I hate when you make a good point because I forget what I was going to say.
I always forget too.
Oh, right. So you're working at a casino, or you're working at a car dealership, or you're working at the vacuum salesman. You always see a certain ineptitude. The bigger the corporate gig, the bigger the ineptitude. And then when I go to something like the DMV or something like that, I feel like I'm witnessing ineptitude at its pinnacle.
Yeah.
So what about working in a deep state position where you're working with federal bureaucracy, SBA type stuff, or are you recognizing that, there's nobody, these people aren't special, they're just regular people who are working for the government instead of working for Caesars? I mean, do you witness more ineptitude, less ineptitude? Do you witness bureaucracy? I mean, just tell me about your experience in what us regular people would call the deep state.
What was interesting about that period was learning a lot about what incentivizes performance and incentivizes poor performance. And, I get that front row view because keep in mind, I'm sent to an agency that in theory was being chopped and eliminated in theory. So my agency, bureaucrats, I'm going to call them civil servants, were looking to me as either the axe hatchet man with devil eyes coming from the White House,
right,
or the savior. Those are their two choices at this point. And it was indeed working with those folks where they were hoping that I could help them on policy at the White House, that they were very agile to a degree at the leadership level. And that was fantastic because I actually saw...
So you were impressed with the leadership at that particular department?
And of course there are exceptions. But
right.
my favorite
In
guy
general.
was this guy, Jim Cruz. He was our policy guy, maybe 80-something. And these are some of the most dear people. So it's not... But in terms of deep state, it's fantastic to be Mr. Smith comes to Washington and very naive, but they see you that way and you behave that way, but then maybe sometimes you're inspired enough to notice. And yeah, I did notice. I noticed ways to use policies to hurt someone. I noticed ways that they could avoid policies to protect someone. I just was able to see that. When it came to our issue, I'm not aware of it being like a priority for that deep state because they always play this very long game. And so if they couldn't survive, the most they needed was at least to not be killed.
Right.
But they could continue like that. It's tough. And there were a lot of consequences to being a shutdown agency. But I did witness sort of the back channel civil servant thing for sure, because we had different shutdowns, and so they had continuity of government, and so then I understood continuity of government in a different way. And then when I left service and I caught up with somebody who I think is a great guy. There was a flip on the switch that went from I need you to you did well for me and I don't need you.
Right.
Yeah. And it was interesting because then that helped like line up, oh, that explains some of this behavior.
Right. And you thought you got a partner in crime or something, but meanwhile you just realized that no, I was helping their particular agenda at that moment.
There are some people, few maybe, that could appreciate that I actually mean what I say.
Right.
And I have and still highly treasure that. I don't resent the others that don't. It just taught me that. What was interesting was I kept a lot of the Democrat appointees around because I had an agency falling apart. Not just that I wanted their expertise. I did too. But I thought every move I made would tell these people who are scared a certain message. But there were a couple appointees who were absolutely deep state. And I just remember, you know, you leave your appointment and then you get your lobby thing at your firm, and then you come back in the next administration, and they always need you.
Right, back and forth.
There's just it's very.
But
ruthless,
then you know, and that brings up, you know, you're talking about right now currently in our national news, getting rid of like McEnany or his chief of staff, the young, what's her name, the blonde chief of staff, not the chief of staff. His legal counsel, Trump's legal counsel.
Oh, Jenna Elson or whatever.
Yeah, and there was another one, the blonde woman.
Oh, I thought that.
His lead counsel. I'm sorry, I'm having a brain fart, but they're being taken off of these committees, these deep state committees. But you know, they have like 3 and 5 year appointments, and they're getting rid of all the Trump people, so it's all Democrat. You know, and like you said, you're trying to maintain a nonpartisan attitude. You're trying to make sure that people who might have been Obama people, that you're coming in with Trump, but you're not trying to get rid of all the Democrats. But meanwhile...
Well, I would have if we were more partisan, to be clear. But, I mean, because it's an important distinction. If I was in a place that was critical to the mission of the Trump administration and I kept those guys in there, that would have been a terrible
well, we're talking about
decision.
law enforcement and they're anti-defund the police.
How about SBA? How about any of those big agencies and departments? It would have been highly inappropriate, my move. Highly inappropriate. Because you need a team that you don't have to look over your shoulder with. And in my situation, I did not have to look over my shoulder.
Right.
Because my circumstance was a very unique one. This was a shutting down agency. So, and I maintain that was the right move. Highly misunderstood at the White House.
Right.
But I did wait for them to tell me what to do, and they did not.
And so, but also, when you go in there and you're used to doing the best job, I don't want to be selling vacuums, but I'm going to do the best job I can. I don't want to do this, but no matter what, you're always going to do the best. You want me to interview Linda McMahon? Yeah. All right, I'm going to interview the best I can.
Watch out.
Right. So, and a lot of times these people, whether it's bureaucratic government or you're talking about like the casino, you know, there's people who have had that job for 20 years. They don't want you to do too good because then they look bad. Like the post office, right? You get a route and you're finished by noon. Well, why wasn't that guy who's been doing it for 20 years working till 5 if you could do it by noon? Yeah. They don't want you to do too good and make them look bad.
Believe me, my biggest headache, and I hope to be at peace soon. No, I'm at peace. The presidential personnel dynamic, given that I was the head of this agency and I was the new guy from Nevada and I was saving it, presidential personnel made it their policy to try to control me, and it was inappropriate. But that was the source of stress for me, was interfacing with that, trying to control me with other personnel. You couldn't, and therefore I was doing good. What, you know, if you're doing good, you know, what does that mean about me is what it was a lot. I had guys and girls who I would bring in, and they just did not understand the thoughtfulness of some of this behavior. Like, for instance, the concept of selling our policy like a sales gig and marketing. Right. They're just political people. Well,
but you got to sell it to the American people.
You have to get allies. If you're in the weakest, you're going to be eliminated. You're the one agency that the Trump administration can eliminate, according to those who want to do. You're the one place. I better get some allies. That means I have to be important to them, and that means I have to find a reason to be important to them.
You have to make friends. You got, you know.
Yeah, I should have made more of those.
So, speaking of Washington, we need to move on because we got a lot more to talk about. But give us your best Trump story. I mean, what was the best anecdotal event? Something he said, something that resonated with you. Give us a little taste of what it's like to work with what could possibly be the best president we've ever had.
The best Trump story I had is probably not like a great one, and then so I'm going to just do two. One's very short.
Go for it. Floor is yours.
It was a front row view of the Reince guys, the guys from the Hill, the lifers, who fully believed and behaved in a manner that showed that they did not think any of the Trump appointees should be there. It was their turn. And so there was constant undermining of the president, constant. And I hired Anthony Scaramucci into the administration, okay? And I liked him. He's very charismatic.
Yeah.
And, he said, gosh, I kept being told that you Trump guys are no good, and that's wrong. And he's like, what you've done here, right? And that was very flattering. Because he's worth something. He's built something.
Right, and he wears his heart on his sleeve. He just
does.
Says what he feels.
He does, that was an interesting time. But I said, don't go and be the communications director. Your stars are rising too fast. I saw that as a phenomenon in politics. Don't do that. And I said, stay here, be the head of this agency, and you'll just watch. Trust me. Well, anyway, he goes and he makes a mistake he did. But when he called that guy, was it Lizzo was the last name? The truth was, there was another person present for that phone call egging him on. And so it wasn't just that the mooch was saying this stuff.
Right.
He was being egged on.
Intentionally, like maliciously?
No, now say this. Yeah.
Right.
And that was really interesting, knowing that was the case, and seeing then, what Mooch responded with and all that. And, I was disappointed when Mooch finally went the direction he did, for sure. And I don't speak. But not that there's a problem. I don't even know who I would be to him. But I mean, I was disappointed in that. But I thought he kept some poise there for a minute that was admirable. And then he didn't. But there was that story, which I thought that was an interesting thing to see. And I brought up the Reince part of it because Mooch helped hire Reince as the chief of staff. He thought it was a good idea to unite everybody.
Right.
Found out how bad it was burned by him, and then boom, went in and got Reince out. And so I had the front row view of that part of it. The second thing is
that's some cutthroat politics.
Yeah. So the other thing that was personal was when the few times I've been with Trump. It's just a few, but I mentioned this a little bit earlier. But the way he sizes you up. First of all, he's there with you. Maybe we're there together right now. Maybe.
Right.
But I know that when you're in his presence, there's presence from him.
Right.
He's sizing you up. And I really appreciate that because it's like he's really interested in actually what's happening.
Listening to the words that are coming out of your mouth.
Yeah, which, if that's a photo line or whatever, like he's going to be distracted with things that are actually important, and yet he's willing to be there.
Right.
And that's a supreme lesson about what presence and interacting with the now and what's actually happening is. So part of his, I'm going to say it because I'm a fan, majesty, right, I think is actually interacting with the now. Which I do like from him.
And you're allowed to be analogous on the Johnny Bruce Show. We're not going to start saying that you think he's an emperor. Don't worry.
Yeah.
You can be analogous. And that's another reason why, guys, all of you who I interview, that's why I don't like to talk to you right before the interview, because then we only tell half the story because we had already talked about it. A lesson learned. Very good, right? Mm-hmm. All right, guys. So, one more thing before we take a break. Tell me about your musical career.
Sure.
And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk everything CCRP, but this was getting to know Jesse Law. And I think we're all intrigued by that majestic voice of yours.
Well, I was always singing centric, right? So I wouldn't have known it as a child that it's weird to sing like Mamas and Papas or Phantom of the Opera or Beatles or on and on and on. But there was always a something there. And then when I saw that peers were like that too, I just thought that was kind of normal. I suppose it was not, but I was in choir and then, in bands, right? So we can talk about that. When I got married, it was just like I listened to music. I wasn't singing music. I mean, I had a whole period of time being dad and husband and all this that was not a singing portion. And then when I got into school, I was convinced, probably because I do things a little
Backwards.
uniquely.
We went through this.
I was convinced that a conventional degree was not something that made much sense to me.
Right. Well, Charlie Kirk says if you're going to go to college, have a reason, have a plan. Don't just go to college for the sake of going to college.
Yeah, I was offended by that premise. So I did go in for classical music training only because they didn't have the rock singing.
Right, but for you to study music on a university level, I mean, you must have. Are you playing instruments? Are you just singing? How do you know music theory and well enough to get accepted to?
Well, there was an audition. What had happened was part of that period of my life was chaotic, I had suffered lots of disappointments in a marriage that ended. Then later, disappointments in work. Disappointments in who I was becoming in that period. And as part of that, though, I recognized something that I felt when I would sing. And to deal with whatever, I would just go and sing at a place called E String.
Over at in Henderson.
And it's not there anymore, right?
I remember it.
But in doing that, I was there 3 and 4 times a week by myself.
Really?
Just by myself.
We might have crossed paths once before. And I'll tell you, you're talking about disappointment or depression. I played my best music and wrote my best music when I was depressed and disappointed.
That's right,
It's a great outlet.
It is, and there were moments when I was singing when I felt like there was something that I would recognize for a minute. It was because I was pushing out
like a deja
something.
vu or a smell, like some kind of overcoming.
No, it felt real. It felt like this is sort of part of me, which turned out, like, since my opinion is that, no, that's my expression of art.
Right.
Okay. And I know that's weird to be, singing Journey and saying that's an expression of art. Actually, I never sang Journey. I want to be clear.
No.
Okay. But
Don't stop believing in Jesse Law.
No, it was Alice in Chains in the very beginning.
Oh, really? I gotta get. Is my guitar here? Yeah. How many of you guys want to hear him sing Nutshell?
Absolutely.
You know the words to
Absolutely.
Nutshell? Is my guitar here or is it at home? Oh my God.
So but the thing is, Lane Staley, okay, that was my range, okay. So but the point was, there were moments when I would glimpse who I was, and I knew that was something more for me. And so then I jumped into schooling specifically because I wanted to explore that as worth something. That was an investment in myself. That investment in myself gave me some sort of sense of different value for myself. That was necessary for me, because then when I was setting goals, which was something that, accomplishing goals set was a phenomenon I learned early on in politics, which made me feel alive. Then investing in myself in music was showing that I gave a damn. And when I started singing opera, it wasn't because I went there to sing opera, but they said, hey, low voice, big voice. And I was obsessed with the anatomy part of learning what it means to resonate, which I still obsess about years later, just the resonance. But when they were teaching that, I would sing because of the focus and concentration, it being big.
Right.
Now I was recognizing that feeling that I would get glimpses of and just singing briefly in this opera. It was a big deal.
Right.
So, oh my goodness.
You got a pick? I don't know if this is really going to happen. I haven't touched a guitar in a year, and you haven't warmed up.
Oh, absolutely. Are you kidding? I was cleaning all day.
You knew I was going to end up
my
making you
neighbors.
sing?
Yeah, I'm always prepared.
I'm gonna go find a pick. We're live, so you got to talk. I'm gonna go.
We're live?
No, we're not live, but we're
like what? So I mean, without Johnny here, I wouldn't know what to talk about. I guess we could just talk crap about him right now. Okay, that's probably a bad idea. The music thing, just to wrap up on that, where I'm at in the career was a question he asked me. It really ended with the education component. The goal at the time became happiness for me. And happiness for me was going to resemble singing maybe even in a lounge. I didn't care. I just knew how I felt.
Well, my dream was to play for 10 people in a bar.
Thank you.
That's all. Same with the podcast. I
Well,
tell them, if 12 people are going to tune in every week, I'll keep making it for those 12 people.
Well,
my
good.
pleasure.
12 is an enormous number. And if they're attached to you.
And I got more.
Okay.
Got more than that. But that's all I needed. I needed 10 or 12.
We'll check with the. But so what ended up happening by being classically trained that way was that they would need a singer for the anthem, and they did get Wayne Newton. But they asked me, Jesse, you're in the music department. Do you know anybody? I'm like, do you mean anybody that's Republican, available, and free, and good enough? And so I became like the guy that sings the national anthem. And the one time Wayne Newton was going to do it, he did have to back out. He's got an older voice, and it is what it is. That's a hard song to do. And so. I have performed for the president double digits. I think it's 10 or 11. I did, and that's a fun thing because every once in a while when I'm doing these performances for different groups, there's like a higher power connection, like a God connection, that then I'm able to just kind of give like an experience. And given that I'm emotional about the national anthem,
right,
and then others can be, there is an experience that's supernatural, and that's like extremely enriching. And so I feel blessed, like you wouldn't believe that I could do that. And so therefore I'll be at Dylan's on Sunday night down in Henderson. I'm just kidding. It's interesting you would say nutshell.
I can't tune it though. I'm too nervous.
Really? Yeah, I see. I just want to make sure that I'm not making some mistake here. I'm confusing the song. All right. Let's do lyrics.
Can you hear it?
Beautiful. Of course I can.
I can't get that B string in tune. Can't. It's out of tune.
Really?
It's not in tune. Is it?
Well, I mean, it's a little out of tune. I'm happy to do it, though. Alan, you good with it?
I'm in E. That's an E flat.
Ah.
That's the problem. I'll tell you guys what. We're going to record a song.
Are we?
Yep. And we're going to talk everything CCRP as soon as we get back. Does that work? You're watching The Johnny Brew Show. Please hit subscribe. And we'll be back for part 2 of the Jesse Law interview. From playing a song to talking about everything Clark County Republican Party as soon as we come back on part 2. Thanks for watching.